We're finally continuing our latest LEGO project, Ancient Rome. In the last video we built the Forum Romanum and I left off by saying that we'd built a new substructure. And this is what I meant by that. Everything is elevated, which has the advantage that we can get a lot more out of the landscaping. In this case we used LEGO Duplo. The big advantage is that LEGO Duplo bricks can be combined with regular LEGO studs. You can match 2x2 regular LEGO studs per 1 Duplo stud, in case you didn't know. This is especially useful for really quickly building up elevation and landscaping. So much for what is already in place. Here in front you can see the next 3-part module being pushed in. We always worked with such module sizes depending on what fit best at the time. Fewer borders means it's more practical, of course. Now we're starting with the first staircase that leads up to the forum. You can already see the parts. Those are these triangle-shaped modified tiles we already used last time. This time we're building them into stairs in a way that they slightly overlap, allowing us to use the structure of the edge so it fits the style of the upper area. As for the fences, we're using the inner part of those turntables that LEGO has released to angle buildings. We simply left out the inlay and that adds a really nice structure. This, by the way, is a part you'll see us use very often throughout this Rome project. So much for the first little green area. Of course, we need to make sure we don't just have a barren desert-like area here in front with a dark tan ground and just a few minifigs. That would be quite boring. So we've added a fountain, green patches to the left and right, a firebowl and this pedestal, which I'll get to in just a second. Let's start with the fountain in detail first of all. It's a wonderful building technique, but honestly quite a pain to film. We're using these small, actually quite new pieces. They are trans light blue water elements, actually intended to be connected via clips, but we're just hanging these parts loosely into a dish, place a smaller one on top connected with a bar and then simply press it all together, and if you're lucky, like I was in this case, it won't fall apart and it's held all together just by pressure. So there's no actual clip connection, but honestly, as long as it doesn't fall apart, I'm happy. On top, a little mini statue and the fountain is done. Now we continue with that pedestal behind the firebowl and the fountain. And first of all, we add a round brick with an attached Technic axle. On that axle we stack on these round bricks. The advantage of these pieces is that it's both stable, thanks to the axle, and they have a larger diameter than the regular round bricks we otherwise use for columns. In the end, it's like a victory column in front, and once again, not a one-to-one replica of the Forum Romanum, so we took some creative liberty here. Next comes another highlight in terms of building techniques. We start with hinges and a Technic brick in the middle. On these studs go curved slopes, then using the Technic brick we insert a jumper plate on which we've placed some decorative elements. You'll see what this is for in just a second. It's a base module for what's coming next. And now I think you can already guess where this is going. We now connect several of these until we have a sort of circular structure. The great thing about this technique is that it fits perfectly together. Maybe there's a little bit of tension, but we've definitely built much more illegal and tension-filled things than this neat round little design. You can also see gutter elements right here on the side. Later they'll be used to support the roof construction, which I'll of course also show you. Underneath, we'll install classic columns using the thinner round bricks once again. Everyone participating in the Rome project prefers using the ribbed ones simply because they add more texture, so that's what we did. Once that's all in place, we can move our finished construction over to the main model and start by placing a firebowl in the center. The entire thing is now inspired by the Temple of Vesta, which housed an eternal flame, and the placement even roughly fits the layout of the Forum Romanum as well, but once again, keep that in mind, it's not a one-to-one replica of ancient Rome. For the roof construction, things get a bit sketchy once again. First, we used fences to create a platform where we can now attach 2 larger round plates. On top of that comes the roof I've mentioned earlier, made out of wedge plates and a large dish to top it off. This structure, which I'm sure you'll want to see a close-up of, is built with ball joints underneath. The big advantage of ball joints is that for once you don't need to worry about tension, so although it doesn't look like it, it's a relatively legal build. Having that done, let's do something a bit more relaxed now. it's time for the next modules. Since we worked with 4 people simultaneously at times, I couldn't film the modules during construction. It was, as you can imagine, a pretty chaotic process, and so I spared you all that, but I'll of course still try to show you everything in detail afterwards. For example, the next building, which will be a kind of market hall, it's designed to be open so you can actually see the interior, which makes it worth filling up with detail. Some chicken, fruit, spices, barrels, the usual market hall stuff. The building will actually be open on both sides, so it doesn't have a main view side and a boring back. In the back, we've therefore embedded some arches into the facade, and in the front we've added a step facade, meaning 3 layers of arches, and we found that with Roman architecture, the more arches and columns you add to the build, the better it looks. And since we recently visited Rome with the entire building team to take a look at the architecture there, we can definitely confirm that. As for the roof, you might have noticed that we started mixing in dark orange with the medium nougat we used last time, just to highlight and add contrast. And since we all like that new roof improvement, we'll most likely have to rework the roofs of the other buildings we've already built so far. Of course, a bit of greenery is also essential. We've pre-built some of these cypress trees. We always like to prepare a few here and there whenever we're in the mood, since we cannot have enough of them. Then it's time for the first triumphal arch. There will be a second bigger one later on, just like in Rome, where there's more than one triumphal arch. The building at the edge here is probably going to be a school. We've tried mixing in a bit of color. At the bottom, sand blue with dark bluish gray. The roof is a bit more creative, kind of Pantheon style, where light can get in from above, so classes only happen in good weather, I guess. I mean, it's more about the style and letting you see the interior, in this case, not about realism. Another building will go on the prepared area in the back. The windows are built using the back of masonry bricks. It makes them look as if there are wooden panels covering the window, and in the end everything is then finished off with curved tiles creating an arch. We then decided to add another patch of greenery right next to the new building, along with some flowers to bring in color, and then of course it's time for minifigures, although we still gotta order so many more figures, as well as work on the storytelling. For now, that's just to fill up the empty space just a tiny little bit. Next up, however, it's time to expand Rome with the next few modules where the Triumphal Procession will take place, and for that we first of all have to prepare the ground. First, we define the path using cut plates, and what's great about these cut plates is that if you layer them at the exact same angle, you get this perfectly clean one stud wide edge. Maybe it's even a bit too clean for ancient Rome, but it really helps highlight the path. That path then leads up to a staircase, which we're building because it lets us get more height into a shorter space compared to using layered cut plates we used for the rest of the path. We angled the outer 2 stair segments at 45 degrees and then connected them to the middle module using hinges. That creates this kind of cauldron-shaped stairwell. I don't think the technique works 100% perfect, it's under a bit of tension, but once we fix it in place using a hinge on the 5th layer, it actually becomes super solid, and that's always the best part, when a build looks tricky, but in the end is super sturdy. Now we can slot that staircase right into the prepared space at the end of the path. It also creates a nice bit of contrast visually. By the way, that's the staircase that leads up to the coliseum, and also the Triumphal Procession will then later on go over it. You'll see the full route in just a bit. From the back, everything is then connected, so the stairs are no longer freestanding but actually linked to the top layer that then keeps the modules from shifting during transportation. Now onto the wall segments. They're mostly installed at angles. A useful trick here is building part of it straight on studs and then attaching a hinge for the angle segment. We did that on both sides. And then for the other segment, we once again used cut plates to prepare a gap for the wall. We actually used a similar building technique back in the pirate world. Although it's much work, it's so satisfying, it needed to make a comeback in Rome. That brings us to this big empty space down here, and I think you can already guess what's going on there. The base of the Triumphal Arch. We're building it almost exactly like the Arch of Septimius Severus on the Forum Romanum, which we actually also visited for reference. The proportions might be slightly adapted and we angled it a bit more, but overall we're once again sticking close to the original layout. Now let's start with one of the columns. we're using modified bricks and these half-rounded pieces to create the look of a cut-off column that then allows us to fill the middle with a solid wall piece, keeping the illusion of full columns in front without any gaps. Super handy for facades, and I think this trick will pop up a lot more throughout the Rome build. The center wall is recessed using jumper plates, so it sits nicely in the middle, and I've actually pre-built the first arch section here. The two side arches are a bit lower and the middle one is slightly taller, just like the real version. Proportionately, it might not be 100% accurate, but it definitely captures the right vibe. I mentioned earlier that we're using a lot of these rotating plate pieces, and that's become a defining style element around the arch. Of course, we need plenty of statues too, so we've added figures into the side cutouts. On the front, we place them onto the pedestals above the columns, and yes, they are all white minifigures. I know many of you want color, but I can't stress this enough. Colored figures would ruin the look here. We're adding colors in other ways, I promise, but just not with the minifigures. The roof on top was added using snotted bricks, and with that done, we can now finally install the Triumphal arch that then fills the gap nicely before we move on to the actual procession. Before that, however, we have to build a few more background buildings. Honestly, that's always the part we don't fight over. Nobody wants to build boring little houses. We all want to build the coliseum, a triumphal arch, or something more spectacular. But those filler buildings are important too, otherwise the whole scene just starts to look too sterile. While working on those, we also handled some landscaping. In case you remember the barrel technique I showed you in part 1, obviously the barrel can't just sit out in the open. That would simply look a bit weird. So we had to sink it into the ground and cover it up with plants, which makes it look as if the flex tubes are growing straight out of the earth. Of course, you can only do that in spots where there's enough vertical room in the model, but we've done it in quite a few areas, including this greener section over here. We've added a few cypress trees to line the path to the next residential building. Again, not a section we fought over, but we can't ignore the residential stuff. That's in the end what completes the build. Now comes the fun part, the triumphal procession. First, we need some kind of banner. These banners, or in our specific case, most likely a vexillum, typically show off inscriptions about conquered territories or military victories, just like you see it in historical illustrations. It's a super simple build, and in the end, we just swap the Roman spear for a vexillum. Of course, not every Roman gets a banner. Some still carry, or most in this case still carry normal spears, and we absolutely had to include a centurion as well. On either side of him there are two of these banners, and now depending on your budget you could scale this procession up endlessly, but here's the catch. This part alone, which you can see right here, is over $1,000 worth of minifigs, so unfortunately we can't go too big with it. We also included some prisoners of war. That's not only accurate, but also every non-Roman minifigure makes the whole procession immediately cheaper. Next, we need to deal with that one empty space right in front. Eventually, this will be covered by a multi-module building, but for now, since this is the first part which will soon be on display, we're closing it off with an archway which creates this sort of alley, just so the end of the path doesn't feel too open. One more thing before we wrap up. The edge of the display. We can't leave it open, so you see the street plates and Lego Duplo bricks underneath. So we're building a nice chunky black border. Even though the model isn't finished, that frame already makes it feel way more complete. It's super easy to extend. You just have to expand it by the amount of base plates. The build gets bigger. Right now, the edge is a bit dominant from the front, but that will eventually balance out as the model grows because we come down in elevation towards the front in future. Next video, we'll already build the Coliseum, then the Rome project goes on display, and then afterwards we're going to expand Rome. So with that being said, that's it for today's video. I really hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you again in the next one.